convene the Board of Directors meeting for Beacon for Friday, January 24th. Could we all, next up is Santa Barbara County Flood Control?
Yes,
Okay.
we have Maureen Spencer with us. Brief presentation. Maureen, thank you for being here this morning.
Good morning. I don't have any fancy pictures or slides or anything. It's just me. But Beacon asked me to come and give you an update on what the flood control district has potentially planned for this year if we have large storms and we have our debris basins start taking on sediment. But before I talk about that, I wanted to add a little bit to some of the things that you said. So the debris flow, we removed between 400,000 and 500,000 cubic yards of sediment from the debris basins between Montecito and Carpinteria. And that was trucked away. None of that went to the beaches. We deposited 28,000 cubic yards of material at Ash Avenue in 2018. We hydraulically dredged Carpinteria Salt Marsh, and that was an additional 20,000 cubic yards that was deposited into the surf zone via a pipe. And then in Goleta Beach, we took about 40,000 cubic yards of material. So in the scheme of things, we didn't take that much material to the beaches compared to what was in our debris basins. And then there's, anecdotal seat of the pants estimates of that probably that same amount of material was spread across the landscape on private properties. And so that just gives you an idea of the magnitude of that event. In 2019, between December and March, we removed over 150,000 cubic yards from those same 11 debris basins. And we took most of that to upland disposal sites. We trucked it out of the area. And we took 20,000 cubic yards to Goleta Beach in 2019 and 28,000 cubic yards to, Carp was 20,000, 28,000 to Goleta Beach. So out of 150,000 from those debris basins and drainages, again, a very little amount went to the beaches. Talking a little bit about the debris basins, so we have plans to modify 3 debris basins in Montecito. That's the San Ysidro debris basin, Cold Springs debris basin, and the Romero debris basin. And so what that really comes down to, if anybody here is familiar with Gubernador debris basin, we have the debris basin embankment, and we cut a notch. And so what happens is most of the fines and gravels and smaller boulders and such are able to move through that system and replenish the downstream and the coast. It's not only great for the coast, but it's good for the entire watershed system because it keeps the downstream areas from eroding. And 2 of those debris basins are slated for removal or modification in 2021. And then the third one, San Ysidro, is slated for modification in 2022. And so two things happen again, as Supervisor Williams mentioned. We have the sediment. We retain the debris basin capacity. We have the sediment movement. We also are incorporating fish passage for the endangered steelhead trout. So it's a good thing. We have been pulling sediment out of our debris basins for over 50 years. Some of those debris basins were put in 1964, and some of them were put in 1971. So that's a long time that we've been pulling sediment out of these debris basins. So we're looking forward to not having to do that. And one of the things that was interesting was that you're talking about the plug of sediment that is seen at Carpinteria Creek. Well, on Carpinteria watershed, we had 2 debris basins. One is the Lillingston debris basin, one is the Gubernador. So Gubernador debris basin was modified in early 2000s. And it was amazing during the debris flow in terms of retaining really large boulders and letting the sediment go through. So it's interesting to see that shows up, and that's what we want to see. And we're looking forward to that with the other basins. The other thing that we have going on is that we are updating. As you may know, we have a dredging program for Carpinteria Salt Marsh. Mainly Franklin Creek and Santa Monica Creek that's been in place since the early 1990s with an EIR. And so we're in the process of updating that EIR. It's been out for public comment. Public comment closed January 10th, I believe. So we're responding to comments, and I'm going to be circling back and having that approved in the next few months. And one of the things that we're doing with that program, the current EIR, the regulatory environment when this was written in the early 90s was that you can't have more than 25% fines that go to the beach. Typically, Carpinteria Salt Marsh drainages have higher than 25% fines. And so that EIR really focused on upland disposal. We had the option for beach disposal, but and we didn't even have to desilt very often, but we couldn't meet the fines requirements. And so part of that project, we are including hydraulic dredging where we didn't before, and we're also going to be talking to the regulatory agencies to pull that fines content up so that we can continue to get that sediment to the beach versus taking it to an upland disposal site. It's right there. It's literally, back in the day, 1964, it was at the Coyote Fire. It was 1964, and at the time, the Army Corps of Engineers would come in, and that's what people did. They would build debris basins. And then after the Romero Fire, I think is the other one, in 1971, they did that as well. We have debris basins from Goleta to Carpinteria on different watersheds. And over the years, the district has just maintained those debris basins. And now back in 2010, we were updating all of our permits for our maintenance programs. And so we had a consultation with National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we received a jeopardy opinion for steelhead trout. And through that process, we agreed to remove or modify 5 debris basins in 10 years. And then we have another group of 5 debris basins that we refer to as Group 2 debris basins. And really what that Group 2 debris basins is about is that with the 6th year of that permit cycle, we need to provide 30% design plans to either modify or remove those basins. We're not required to, but the idea behind that is if we have those plans available, we're poised in case we have grant funds coming through. So we are responsible for funding those removal or modifications for the 5 debris basins. And so those other ones are poised. We haven't done the 30% plans yet. We're not into the 6th year of that cycle. And that Group 2, those 5 basins, will be under consideration and discussion in that next permit cycle. But in the end, the district has never liked removing sediment from the debris basins, but we have to maintain them. And I don't know if everybody has heard, but we simply don't have places to put sediment anymore like we used to. It was just kind of incremental, and it's gotten really, really difficult.
Well, that's
Except the beach. And so we digress, and I wanted to get back. So that's a little few things.
good. What kind of response are you getting from the regulatory agencies as you're advocating for being allowed to put higher fine percentages onto the beach? And what are can you characterize that
Sure.
conversation?
In general, not a lot of comments, but that's not uncommon. Often regulatory agencies don't comment, and then they have lots of things to say when we go for a permit. So, but we did receive a comment letter from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and there is concern about increasing the fines level, and in order to do so, we're probably going to have to formulate a pilot study, a pilot project, and we kind of knew that. I mean, we've been having conversations with regulatory agencies for years about, well, what if we want to bring this up? Can we do a pilot study? And we were focusing more on Goleta, because we also have a dredging program there. And the challenge there is that we never had high fines. So we could never do the pilot study. And so I think it's more acceptable. The idea is more acceptable. We're going to have to come up with a pilot study and the appropriate permitting route. There's some disagreement on what the appropriate permitting route is, whether you're using the Clean Water Act or the Marine Protection Act. One of the challenges is it doesn't say anywhere in any regulation that 25% fines is the cutoff. It doesn't have a number anywhere. And so that's where we refer to that regulatory environment at that time. And so we're trying to, and there's a long history that I won't bore you with in terms of why that is and what kind of nourishment occurred. We do it a little bit differently. We're not building profiles of the beaches up, we're pushing into surf zone. So that's a different, so we're going to move forward and hopefully get something going out there. Let's see. Oh, so I wanted to bring you back to what's happening right now. So here we are, year 3 after the Thomas fire. We still have watersheds that are not fully recovered. And we also have a fire, the cave fire above Goleta. And so we have some potential for sediment delivery into our basins still. So if we have the storms that are going to produce sediment and we start getting sediment into our debris basins, we will, if we need to, go to Carpinteria Beach at Ash Avenue or Goleta Beach, depending on where the sediment is and how much it is. And we've notified the regulatory agencies that it's a possibility. It was a courtesy notification. They don't act on that notification. They just, put it in their back pocket. And we do that as a courtesy in case they need or want to have internal conversations so that they're not having to have those while we're, running around trying to get these basins cleared. So that's what we have planned, and we'll do all the testing that we're required to, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Spencer.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yes, I have a question.
Directors, Richards.
Yeah, you mentioned the testing, and in Goleta, that's one of the things that I hear about. When residents see the dumping, they immediately, have a lot of questions about, like, well, what is it that they're dumping? Has it been tested? Is it safe? Can you describe a little bit? You mentioned that you're doing all the required. Can you describe for us what that is exactly?
Yeah, so we have specifically the Regional Water Quality Control Board under the California EPA, and the US EPA also chimes in. So we have a permit, we have an emergency permit that is still in place from 2 years ago, or last year, and it requires testing for pesticides, hydrocarbons, that would be gasolines and diesels and those kinds of things, metals, and then we also do water quality testing for fecal indicator bacteria. And what we do is we test source sites, and then as we're dumping, we continue to take samples from the trucks as they dump, and we collect, and then every 3 days we send a new sample in. We also do grain size analysis. And so the regional board permit that all the other agencies have agreed with, they're like, okay, they put those conditions in, we're good with it. So we send weekly reports when we're doing our disposal. And so all of that is sent to the regulatory agencies, and they have the option to say, ooh, we don't like that. We have not seen contaminants. You see trace things. We live in an urban environment, but we're not exceeding standards of anything.
And I'm sorry. And what about the impact of the water quality? Do you test that, or who monitors that?
So what we do for water quality testing is fecal indicator bacteria. So we do it when we're disposing, but also the public health department does it. They just do it through the winter anyway. And then if we're doing deposition, they kind of ramp up what they're doing and they add a few more sites. So there's some overlap of what we do and what they do. And so that's for the public health realm. And we could spend an hour talking about fecal indicator bacteria, but that's what we test for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Shaw.
This is more question. One of the questions we get a lot from our residents is the idea of the emergency permit
Yes.
to dump sand at Ash Avenue. That being said, is that an open-ended permit? Is there a time frame involved there that, because you're saying you're still working on the same permit?
Right,
Correct?
so the only standing permit that we have from last year was the Regional Water Quality Control Board permit. And so they wrote a permit last year, and at the beginning of this year, they said, do you want us to close out this permit, or do you want to just let it go and reopen it? And from a process standpoint, it's just easier to keep it there and then pay the fee than it is for them to resurrect it. All the other agencies, so for the Coastal Commission, we didn't get a hard permit, we got a permit waiver. And so they provide a permit waiver to us. For the Army Corps of Engineers, their emergency permit has a very distinct time period, and it expired, so we don't have those current permits. So it's more, it's not that we're keeping it open because it's easier for us to dispose. We're keeping it open because it's a process in the bureaucratic world of permits.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from members of the public? Okay, we are adjourned until March 20th. Thank you.